Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Richardson. I'm a fellow here at the Joint Center, and I'd like to welcome you all to this event today. The group here has been putting together a wonderful report on improving America's housing since 1999, and I know this has been a very important resource, a resource that you're able to leverage certainly in terms of understanding the pulse of the industry and certainly your business. Today we've got a very interesting group of panelists. I'd like to do a brief introduction and then we'll dive right into our topic. To the right of me is Kermit Baker. Kermit is the director of the Joint Center for the Remodeling Futures Program, but also one of the lead authors of the report. Also Richard McVeigh, who's Senior Vice President at the Home Depot, is responsible for U.S. operation within the finance department with merchandising, store operations, supply chain, as well as certainly homedepot.com. Also Richard O'Regan, Group President of Global Plumbing for Masco, responsible for overseeing a number of the plumbing brands, certainly including Delta Faucets as well as Liberty Hardware. And last but not least is Brad Siegel. He's the chairman of Remodeling or Rebuilding Together. Wonderful organization that's really dedicated to providing home rehabilitation as well as modification services to the low-income homeowners across the United States. So today, we also not only are able to hear live from the panelists, we're also able to address your questions through Twitter. So I encourage you to, as you have a particular question, you can always use the hashtag Harvard Remodeling and be able to tweet us, and then we'll be able to weave that into the event as well. So in beginning this, I'd like to start with Kermit Baker. We certainly have some of the images from the report that we'd like to be talking about as well. And Kermit, as one of the authors of the report, can, I think, help us to put everything a little bit in context. That context, Kermit, being, the size of the marketplace and how we're doing in terms of sort of the dynamic and level of recovery.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. And let me join you in, in welcoming our viewers to this event and talk about our remodeling report that we're releasing today. It's a team effort. There's really involvement of everyone at the Joint Center in this report. But I'd like to particularly acknowledge two people on the Joint Center staff that were key authors for this, principal authors for this report, and they are Abby Will and Elizabeth La Jeunesse. The report we've been putting out, as you mentioned now, for almost 20 years, Mark. A principal goal of that is to benchmark the size of the market nationally. And as our viewers can see in the first image, we're estimating the size of the market to be just under $300 billion as of 2013, which is the year that we're focusing on to benchmark in this report. $300 billion is 2% of our economy, almost 2% of our economy, so a very important kind of economic driver. The market in 2013 was up 6% from our last benchmark estimate in 2011, but still down 8% from the peak of the market during the last cycle in 2007. The home improvement industry that we discuss in this report, we use a very broad definition in terms of the activities that we're talking about. So it includes improvement spending by owners on their homes, as well as maintenance and repair expenditures by owners on their home. We also get into work on the rental stock, improvement spending by rental property owners, and maintenance and repair expenditures on the rental stock too. So it's a broad definition. We're benchmarking for 2013. For 2014, we estimated that the industry saw high single-digit growth. So that brings the market up to about almost $320 billion. The implications are that 2015 Mark should be the year that this industry fully recovers. It's going to reach or exceed, in our view, the market high that we saw in 2007. So, good positive traction here, good momentum behind this industry, a lot going on that's pushing up spending.
Great, thank you, Kermit. So, diving into some of our panelists and experts, and obviously you touch the industry and certainly the marketplace from different perspectives, I'd like to ask Richard Reagan, all products, needless to say, weren't created equal. Some products in the marketplace have done better and probably some not quite as well as others. Help us to understand that from your perspective in Masco.
Well, I think as was noted in the report, what we've seen come to fruition is that a lot of the higher end, more affluent products have been very successful for us. Our Brizo fashion line, our Axor line, which are higher price point, more designer oriented, have done very well over the last few years, and in fact will have seen a record quarter for both of those. Windows, even in windows, we've seen the premium mix come back in our Milgard window systems. So definitely those higher end products we've seen strength in, as well as the value-based peerless for remodeling of multifamily units. We've seen that as well.
Excellent. Now I want to actually have Richard, you follow up that Richard McVeigh with Home Depot, because obviously you service such a wide range of products and qualities, but also a wide range of those do-it-yourself versus those that are working with a professional. Are you finding that same sort of the more higher end or the higher quality products come back? Or are you finding a slightly different story from Home Depot's perspective?
Well, there's certainly a gradual shift towards higher end product, but speaking generally, I'd say, what we have noticed is that, if you look at the business from 2006, 2007 peak levels, we look at our business from that point and look at categories and say what categories have recovered fully, what have not. And if you break it down that way, you notice that actually a lot of the categories that are more heavily penetrated in larger remodel spend, where you actually are putting discretionary or purchasing higher end discretionary products, those categories haven't quite recovered to the degree that the categories where you would say are more highly penetrated in repair, maintenance, and replacement. The examples would be some of your core building materials, windows and doors, and the like. But the good news is, as Richard said, we've seen a reemergence of those categories in the last 24 months. So we are seeing it come back. Interesting.
Now, shifting over, Brad, to your community, and your community, needless to say, are those that are in need of a little bit of help, a little bit of assistance. While we've seen this nice little uptick, as Kermit shared, in terms of the marketplace, give us sort of a sense of the impact of that on those that maybe are from a little bit lower income or more an aging population. What's the impact for them?
Well, a couple of things. The first is that the lower income homeowners have been hit very hard by the slowdown in the economy, and many of them have not been able to return to the workforce, so that investing in their homes, making repairs and renovations, has become increasingly more difficult. Low-income homeowners, as the report states, spend a much higher percentage of their overall income in repair projects for their homes. So it's a much bigger burden for them. Same thing with senior citizens that are trying to age in place, many of them living on pensions, and the same thing for disabled Americans that are living on potentially disability, limited income. They've really struggled to just make ends meet the basic needs of food and medicine, and very often have to neglect home repair projects. And that's where we are able to come in and help those people.
Now, Kermit, there's a lot of different ways to sort of cut and slice, I think, the market and sort of the dynamic that's happening out there. I think the one of the area we oftentimes talk about in the industry is those sort of the market composition as it relates to discretionary and replacement type product. Give us a sense of what those numbers are reflecting for you.
Well, Mark, as you say, it's a big market. It's a complicated market. A lot of different pieces sort of jumbled together when we're talking about the home improvement industry. As I said in my introductory remarks, we use a broad definition of what we call home improvement activity. By our definition, about 80% of it is spending by owners to improve or maintain their home. About 20% of it is spending on rental properties. The biggest slice overall are owners doing improvements to their home. That single piece accounts for almost 2/3 of the entire market in terms of spending, and it's the most dynamic part, and therefore the part that we spend the most time in the report really focusing on. We break the market down into a few major categories. You mentioned discretionary sort of projects that homeowners want to do but don't always need to do them. They can put them off if they're a little bit nervous about what's going on in the economy or what's going on in their personal life. That would be projects like kitchen and bath remodels, room additions, structural alterations to the home. So, broad base of big ticket items that, like I say, that households do when they're feeling good about things and generally defer when they're not. The second major piece is we put under the category of replacement projects. So that would be things like exterior replacements, roofing, siding, windows, exterior doors, as well as upgrades to major systems in the home. So HVAC system upgrades, electrical, plumbing, things like that. And then finally, the third category would be interior projects, carpeting, paneling, and other things on the replacement category. There is a fairly large, what we would call a residual category, improvements to the property, but not to the principal structure. So that might be outbuildings, might be driveway improvements, swimming pools, and also in that category we put disaster repairs, so things that sort of don't really have a clear definition. So the current distribution of the market as of our 2013 benchmark estimate is that discretionary projects are about 30% of spending overall. Replacement projects about 50%. And the other category I talked about as being the remaining 20%. Those shares obviously shift a fair amount over the cycle. So during the last boom, 2005, 2006, 2007, discretionary and replacement projects were just about evenly matched. So when the market gets stronger, gets healthier, we see more on the discretionary side. When it's weaker, we see a higher share on the replacement side.
Excellent. Richard?
And one of the things just that we think underpins discretionary spend, and for us it's very hard to measure what is truly discretionary versus not, but we believe there's no avoiding the impact that rising home values have had on the market. And if you look at some of the statistics, and I won't recall the number of years ago, but a few years ago over a quarter of mortgage holders were underwater, and now it's closer to 10 to 12%. As folks build up positive equity in their homes, it makes them feel better about investing in them. And so we think a lot about are homeowners looking at their homes as an expense or an investment? And we think that that's shifted a bit to seeing their homes as an investment again.
I think that whole dynamic of not only the types of projects and whether it's more discretionary or need driven is important, but another dimension, Richard McVeigh, I'd like to maybe have you comment on, and maybe even other panelists, is a little bit more on who's doing the work. Is that do-it-yourselfer or that homeowner tending to feel comfortable doing those things? With the proliferation of products and choices and sort of the awareness of complexity of remodeling today, how is that changing, I think, the homeowner rolling up their sleeves and sort of diving in and tackle the things themselves versus bringing in a professional? What are you seeing in terms of that blend?
Well, as we try to do every day is bring innovation to the marketplace so that our customers who do want to do projects themselves are more able, every year to tackle projects they wouldn't have otherwise done.
What are some of those projects that they might tackle themselves?
Well, I can
That they
tell
may
you.
not have
I
in
can
the
tell you
past.
with my partner sitting beside me, the advances in paint technology, and particularly Behr at the Home Depot, just make it so much easier to apply to finish the job perfectly. There are advances in plumbing, where there are actually rough plumbing projects that the technology around actually joining plumbing components together is much easier and faster than has been in years past. Toilet installation, the advent of simpler fixtures. It's really across the board, and we think that that's our responsibility to bring those to market.
I think also, Mark, I can remember way back when we baby boomers were entering the housing market, that we were never going to do any jobs ourselves. We're just a generation that didn't have the skills to do that, and that turned out not to be the case. And then moving on to the Gen Xers, well, they were never going to do any work themselves because they didn't have the ability to, and that turned out not to be true. And I think we're hearing the same thing now about millennials. Millennials will never undertake jobs themselves, but I think that'll be proven wrong too.
And I think the report kind of bears that out, and we've seen the statistics. The curve of what percentage of an age segment wants to do it themselves hasn't really changed that much over the years. So we think that's encouraging.
Yeah, and I think related to that, and I'm maybe interested in whoever wants to comment on this, I think if you look at the overall numbers that Kermit certainly and the team reported, we're getting just about where we were, sort of in the go-go times, back in 2007. However, if you follow that same curve on the do-it-yourselfers, not quite back where it was. Why do you think that is? It seems sort of counterintuitive in a way. When it's tough out there, you expect people to roll up their sleeves and do more themselves.
I think Richard will have some insights on this, but I think one factor, Mark, is the types of projects. And during the downturn, a lot of tax credits for energy upgrades and things like that. Put in new windows, upgrade your HVAC system. I think very few households are comfortable doing those kinds of projects themselves. Households just don't do their roofing projects or siding projects themselves. So as the market is swinging back more to these interior projects, some of these discretionary projects, they traditionally have had a higher do-it-yourself share, and I think we're seeing that bounce back in that direction.
Got it. So let's take a moment and talk about some of the different markets around the country, because just like all projects are not sort of created equal in products, also all markets aren't the same. So Richard O'Regan, why don't you comment, because obviously you have touch points all around the country and all the different markets, and we can certainly see from our slide. Maybe you can comment on some of the different conditions throughout the country.
Our sales are bearing out very much what you see on the slide, which is the large urban markets are having a significantly faster return. We're seeing investments in those markets for a number of reasons. Part of it is a cultural shift, wanting to move to the urban areas, which often requires renovation. So we're seeing tremendous growth in our plumbing products in major metros across the U.S. But things like windows in California, we're seeing that come back very quickly. Our Well Home Services division, which does energy efficiency improvements, we're seeing in the Northwest. So we're seeing that reinvestment very much in the Northwest and the major metros, as was indicated in the report.
Excellent. So another dimension, I think, Richard, is that we want to talk or touch on, that I think a lot more energy is put in the report. And I think it's important that we've been talking for a long time about the impact to the baby boomers in terms of remodeling spend. Give us a sense of what you're seeing in some of the generational spending and some of the demographics with respect to the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and all the different generations coming up.
Happy to. So I'd start with the boomers who, as you show in the graph, make up the majority of or the largest share of the home improvement market. I think if you look at, again, that period 06 to 14, what sustained home improvement was that level of replacement, repair, maintenance cycle. So if you think generationally, the boomer generation is going to tend to have been in their homes longer. They're going to tend to have less change in their family circumstances. By that point, most kids will have moved out of the house, and so there's not the remodel spend. There's the replacement and maintenance, as I said. Again, looking at that segment of the population, we think that they're going to be around and the biggest part of our market for a long time. And studies show that they actually continue to spend on their homes long after spend in other categories, discretionary categories, has fallen off. And you think about it, a lot of them, as the report shows, intend to stay in their homes for a long time. They've got the means to make their homes more efficient and more comfortable, and now, as we see trends toward aging in place, more safe. So the boomers will stay in a very important part of our business. Generation X, the report talks about the emergence of it. I think that this is a natural emergence. Again, they are, when you reach your sort of mid-30s to 50s age range, your income generation, your wealth generation, the family dynamics, raising a family, a growing family, tends to lend itself towards remodeling. On the millennial side, I think it's interesting. A lot has been said about the deferral of a lot of life events for millennials, marriage, kids, home ownership. And while that's absolutely true, if you look attitudinally, the millennial generation isn't that much different from any other generation. If you were to canvass renters, you'd see that the vast majority of renters in the United States actually either plan to or aspire to own their own home in the next several years. So I don't know that there's been that attitudinal shift. We also see that millennials spend across our departments in the exact same proportions as other cohorts in our customer base. So while there are differences, I think that as the millennial generation ages, you'll see more similarities to generations before them.
Great.
But there's no doubt their economic circumstances right now are more difficult than previous generations faced at that point.
Excellent. So let's sort of shift to part two of this discussion and begin talking about the workforce, talking about the labor, the folks that make all this happen. The reality, if you listen, sort of put your ear to the ground, you hear a lot of concerns about who's going to be doing this work in the future. And we saw, as the report, I think, certainly shares how that changed in the downturn in terms of the workforce that's out there. Kermit, why don't you share maybe, and we can certainly share with the report as well, or the slide as well, a little bit more insights on the labor force.
Well, I would say, Mark, that labor is probably the number one issue facing the construction industry today. A lot of concern about where's the future labor force coming from. And I think it's a bit ironic that this industry that was reporting 20% plus unemployment rates not that many years ago is now having difficulty producing enough skilled workers to support the industry. So it turns out that the labor force, the construction labor force, got an awful lot smaller during the downturn, and there's a industry-wide need to rebuild it now. As we show in the report and on the slide, Mark, the construction labor force traditionally has looked an awful lot different than the overall workforce. There's heavy reliance on immigrants, the foreign-born in the construction industry. There's heavy reliance on vocational and technical training for the construction workforce other than traditional formal post-secondary education. And thirdly, and I think it really sticks out, is that there's hardly any women in the construction industry, and that's a huge problem along a number of different dimensions, I think, which we can talk about. But I think that it does demonstrate how we're going to have to solve this problem. We're going to have to solve this problem by attracting more immigrants into the workforce, by rebuilding our vocational and technical training programs on construction techniques, and thirdly, attracting more women into the industry.
Excellent. Let me toss it back over to Richard Reagan. You have a tremendous amount of workforce under the Masco umbrella in your service. What are you seeing not only what are you seeing, what's your reaction and what are you doing in terms of this? And is it a real problem?
Absolutely. It's absolutely I would agree that it's one of the most significant problems facing the construction industry. So we have an installation services business. The installation services business has 8,000 people and 5,400 trucks on the road. And they consider to be facing the most difficult labor situation in the last decade. For many of the reasons that it's reported, they have left the trade. Many of the people who were once in the trades, both skilled and unskilled, are no longer there. I can tell you I've gone out and worked with wholesalers and suppliers and plumbers who used to have 800 trucks on the road, and they're down to 100 trucks on the road. And they just can't find that workforce in order to come back to the trades. So things that we're trying to do with our installation services, changing the compensation programs to having fixed 401ks and incentive programs and bases, significant emphasis on training and standardization to help those people come back to a trade that they might not have had. We do scholarship programs to bring younger people into the workforce through Brasscraft and Delta. Those are some of the things that we're doing to try to overcome what is definitely a difficult problem for the industry.
Now, Brad, your organization is obviously not only you have folks out there that are doing the work, you're also asking them to volunteer their time. So how are you addressing this issue? Because clearly there's going to be a scarcity of those that can ultimately help your communities.
Well, we have a large number of people that are willing to volunteer to help on projects that are unskilled. So they can help clean up houses, they can paint and do simple basic work in homes. There's a serious shortage of skilled labor willing to help us do roofing, plumbing, electrical, where a real skill is needed. And we're definitely seeing that affect our affiliates across the country. So definitely a factor. But we do find that more and more, especially the millennials, do want to come out and volunteer on projects and help people in their community.
Excellent. How about more the professional workforce? You were talking about that with Richard. How about from Home Depot's perspective in terms of this workforce? What are you doing to help train, prepare? What's your sort of pulse in terms of this issue from Home Depot's perspective?
Well, I think I'd have to say we want to be the best where our professional customers want us to be the best for them. So for the most part, that means being a great business partner and an easy place to shop. We do, though, we have some things that we're trying. Certainly, education for our DIY customers has always been a big part of what we do. Go into a Home Depot on any given week and you'll see our how-to clinics. There's certainly a natural extension of that you can imagine for the professional customer as well, who's looking for that vocational education. And it's not something that we've, that is landed by any means, but certainly, we'll be looking to do all we can.
The situation, I think, Mark, has gotten worse this time because the downturn has been so long and so pronounced. I mean, I think the construction industry is used to these 2, 3, 4-year cycles where you may, activity may dip 10, 15, 20%, and I think it's able to cope with that in terms of labor and training programs. With the market now peaking on the new construction side in 2006, remodeling in 2007, we're now 7, 8 years into this cycle, and a lot of these programs that were turning out workers have shut down, quite frankly, and we just need to get this infrastructure moving again. We need to rebuild from the ground up the way that we've trained our workforce, and it's a daunting proposition.
Excellent. Well, we're getting some questions from not only from our audience, but audience long distance. If you would like to send a question, you can always use Twitter and tweet us at Harvard Remodeling. One of the questions that actually has come through that I think is probably, not necessarily something we've addressed, but it's likely interest rates are going to go up, not down. At least that's what all the indicators are reporting. What do you think the impact of that might be on home improvement? Because needless to say, if we're seeing interest rates go up a point or two, then it certainly would have a tremendous impact in terms of what you can do with that dollar. Kermit, why don't you start with that?
Let me start on that. I think it's a fairly complicated phenomenon, Mark, so let me try to walk through it. Let me kind of reiterate what you said. The Fed has stopped buying long-term bonds, so long-term rates, once things settle out, are going to go up again. And they've been pretty clear that they're going to start raising short-term rates probably about the middle of the year. As I said, it's got some pluses and minuses. On the long-term side, I think actually one of the pluses for the home improvement industry is that most homeowners in this country have either purchased a home or refinanced their home mortgage at historically low rates, 3.5%, 4%. And I think the issue going forward is that if you traditionally trade up to a nicer home, you want more features, you want more space, things like that, that implies you're going to have to cash in your historically low mortgage rate and take out a new one at prevailing rates. And I think a lot of households are going to take pause at that and say, gee, is that really what I want to do? Or can I build out my current home? Can I add those features to my current home? So I think that could definitely be a plus to the home improvement industry. On the negative side, most home equity lines of credit are based on short-term rates, prime or something like that. As the prime rate goes up, as short-term rates go up, which I think they're inevitably going to starting later this year, it's going to cost more to take out a home improvement loan. And that's an added burden that households may or may not decide to do. This industry is somewhat unique in the sense that it doesn't rely as much on financing as other industries. Our research has indicated that traditionally only about a third of projects are financed with a home equity line of credit or a home improvement loan. 2/3 are kind of cash or credit card basis. That ratio has gotten even smaller during this downturn. So fluctuating rates probably affect the home improvement industry less than they would home buying, automotive purchase, or other sorts of things that might be comparable.
How about you, Richard McVeigh? What's your pulse of the impact of interest rates on sort of your core business or the home improvement activity?
Yeah, I'd have to echo what Kermit said. I think there's certainly something there in the mobility dynamic where if you have a historically low mortgage rate, you're going to look to add to your home rather than to trade up. As we've looked historically, we haven't really seen a very tight correlation between interest rate movements and movements in home improvement spend. And so it's not a dynamic that we're paying a lot of attention to.
And I think the reason for that may be that as interest rates go up, it's often because jobs are increasing, the economy's growing, and other offsetting factors.
Yep.
You do have an awful lot of moving pieces in answering that question. So if you look at existing home sales, the latest report, it's the widest gap in that it's the vast majority of existing home sales versus new home construction, which then leads to more immediate remodeling when you're moving into an existing home. And there's lots of reasons for that. It's people wanting to move into the closer suburban and the urban infill areas. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces going on.
Brad, one of the questions also I think you'd be probably most appropriate to address, and that is, I think certainly investing in the home is, we all believe it's a smart thing to do. I think, if not, your home is your greatest asset. But what's the impact of that, or what's your sort of read on that as it relates to the effect of communities and the effect of, this demographic within the communities in terms of the importance of investing in the homes?
Well, so our clientele are low-income families, senior citizens, disabled, and veterans. And very often they're living on pensions, disability, government funding, and really don't have the funds to spend on improving their homes. Very often their inability to spend on their homes accumulates over time because they're not making the maintenance spend that most families do. The average family will spend, say, $500. The average low-income family spends $500 a year on maintenance repairs, which is 80% below the national average. So what happens is that when they do need work done, the work it's much more difficult. Simple maintenance would prevent a lot of things from happening. And then they have to spend more money on bigger projects. So most of what they do is not discretionary, it's critical repairs. So it's roofing, replacing windows that are drafty and letting air come in, replacing HVAC and units where people are living with no heat or air conditioning, plumbing upgrades, people living with health issues, mold in the house as a result of a lot of these different conditions. So the people that we do help are greatly affected by what's happening here.
Excellent. Now, Kermit, I know within the report there are many different things that you and the team looked at, but one of the questions that we got through Twitter was what types of remodelers are doing better in this recovery as we're moving forward?
Sure. Well, as we discussed, Mark, remodeling home improvement is a big, diverse industry, and the contractor base serving them is a big, diverse industry too. A lot of different types of contractors there. We've estimated that there are probably 600,000 remodeling contractors nationally, a huge number. 2/3 of those contractors have zero payrolls, no employees on payroll. Of the third that do have payrolls, average size is under $500,000 in gross revenue. So they're small businesses, small fragmented businesses, and for that reason they generally need to focus on a certain part of the market. So your full service remodeler may take on any project, often are doing more design build types of bigger ticket remodels and things like that, as opposed to your specialty contractor, a roofing contractor, a siding contractor, window replacement contractor, generally will focus on those single product lines. And for that reason, they can be more efficient, and they have, quite frankly, done better during this downturn. We've seen more focus on replacement projects, but they're also the contractors that are a little more efficient, a little better at managing their labor and managing costs, and in a down market, that's what you really need.
Excellent. Another question I think that we'll toss out again that was sent to us, that one of the other sort of key indicators that those I know that Kermit, you and the team keep an eye on is home ownership rates. And at the peak of the home ownership rates, we saw them 67, 68%, and then we saw them dip off a little bit. And I'll start with, Richard, why don't you sort of comment of, is that a concern in terms of watching that home ownership rate moving forward versus obviously the alternative, which is the renter?
Right. So home ownership, I think, moves in cycles. I don't know that, obviously we've seen a decline in the rate. I don't know that I'm sure it won't last forever. I think long term we'll continue to see cyclicality in that. I believe that there has been a shift to spending in the renter market that has made up a lot of ground that the decrease in home ownership rate has sort of brought about. And Kermit, you might help me with some statistics from your report, but first of all, if you look at the housing stock in the United States, that's what we serve in the home improvement industry. It's 130 million units, regardless of who owns them. And while there are statistics that say a rental unit may not have quite as much spent on it as an owned unit, we know that a lot of the maintenance on, well, first of all, more rental units are single family in nature than multifamily in nature. And we know that of that group, a lot of the maintenance has been deferred in the last decade. And I can't quite remember the statistics, but so we're seeing more spend. as landlords and property owners bring those properties up to standard. So I think long term, we have a certain standard of living every year. The general population's expectation of standard of living rises, and that translates into home improvement spend, whether it's owned or rented.
Yeah, as Richard said, average spending on a rental unit is below the average spending on an owner-occupied unit. So I think that's why we as an industry care about home ownership. But it is a little more complicated than that. If you look at it on a square footage basis, it's actually not that much different. And I think Richard made an excellent point that a lot of the increase in the rental stock we're seeing are basically single-family homes that 3, 4, 5 years ago were owner-occupied homes that went through the distressed foreclosure problem. Now they're in the rental stock, probably going to be back in the owner stock in the not too distant future. So they're going to look a lot from I think an improvement in maintenance and repair business like a single family owner occupied home.
So I would suggest that the more important aspect of that is home appreciation, not ownership rate per se, because it's with the home appreciation, whether it rental or whether it not, be that you have that reinvestment back into the property.
Excellent. So we've spent some time taking a look at making sense out of what's happening out there, a little bit of time on the workforce and labor. Now let's sort of look to the future, some of the emerging trends and some of the things that you all are seeing out there. And one, I think that I find fascinating, and I hope, Brad, maybe you can articulate or comment on, is this whole theme of aging in place and sort of the importance. And for a long time being the last 10, 20 years, it seems like aging in place was sort of a popular thing to be talking about. But now we're starting to see it almost more as a sustainable business, as a sustainable focus. And maybe it's a product of certainly the demographics and the changes, but I'm sure that's a world that maybe you can comment on.
Well, it is a big part of what we do, and the numbers are staggering. According to the report, there's 26 million Americans over the age of 65 in 2010. That number will grow to 35 million by 2020. And we have to be prepared to help these people age in place. Much of the housing stock in this country really isn't properly equipped for people to age in place safely, as illustrated in figure 5.3. The report shows that while over 75% of all homes have a bedroom and bathroom on the main floor, almost 40% of them have steps between rooms. Over 55 have entry steps, access into the home, and over 60% do not have handicap accessible bathrooms. In total, there's only 25% of all homes in the country have all three of these features. So when you look at the overall number of homes in the country, we're looking at literally millions of homes that are not adequately set to allow senior citizens to age in place. Over 60% of the projects we do as an organization are for people over 65. The vast majority of our projects are making homes handicap accessible, installing ramps at entrances and within rooms, installing grab bars in bathrooms and other home safety modifications that do allow senior citizens to age in place. And while it's a big part of what we do, the reality is that we're only touching the tip of the iceberg, because the number of projects we do a year is in the 8,000 to 10,000 projects a year. And I believe we're the largest organization providing home repairs across the country, and we're just really providing a small number compared to the millions of projects that will be needed out there for low-income families.
Mark, we at the Remodeling Futures Program have had the opportunity to work pretty closely with Brad's group, Rebuilding Together, and it's a very impressive organization that's meeting a really fundamental need. Rebuilding Together's audience is largely older Americans, many disabled, living at homes without the features that we talk about here. And the alternatives, if Rebuilding Together or someone's not in modifying those homes is the occupants are going to have to be somewhere else. They're going to be living in a nursing home or
right.
rehabilitation center, where the cost to society much greater than it would be just for what might be a simple ramp or something else to make that home more accessible. And it's back to Brad's point, it's keeping communities together too, because if they had to move out, that would obviously be a disruption to the fabric of the neighborhood that those households are living in. So we do have a big problem here between the aging baby boomers that are big numbers, want to age in place, and often their home just doesn't allow them to do that. And we can do some of that, fix some of that through new construction, but that's not going to work in most areas of the country. We need to do it through the home improvement side.
Another emerging certainly trend, and I would say similar to aging in place, is that that's the whole focus on sustainable home improvements and energy efficiency. And it's been said that Americans oftentimes make their decisions based on the price of gas at the gas pump. However, many of us out there today, I think, are seeing a shift. We're seeing a level of sensibility and caring on the part of Americans when it comes to the healthy home and when it comes to energy efficiencies that aren't just based on purely just the economics. And I think this is an important enough niche or trend that we're seeing out there. I'd like each of the panelists maybe to just comment on, within your world or through your lenses, what are you seeing? And maybe starting with Richard or Reagan, because needless to say, you've got a big energy efficiency or energy related business with your home services.
We do. So if you look at Well Home, which is intended to do exactly that, to go into someone's home and provide the services to make them more energy efficient, that's a very growing business for us. But I think it's across the industry. So when you look at programs like WaterSense, which is to effectively use water and put some new lower use standards in place, it has traditionally been an EPA discretionary item. There's a bill in place to make that a funded item, if you will, a mandatory, much like Energy Star is on the appliance side. So you see both regulatory and demand-driven needs for that. If I just look at my products itself, H2O Kinetics, which uses 30% less water from a shower head, but provides a great experience. Our sales of that alone have been tremendous, and in fact, was one of your best sellers recently. So there is a definite demand in the marketplace for both the services and for the products, but also we're seeing regulation occur to help us move in that direction.
How about you, Richard? Richard McVeigh?
I'm right in line with Richard's comments. I think that the efforts from a decade ago were more about marketing and maybe less about product efficacy, and now I think you've certainly seen that turned, and so we see customers responding to technology advancements in water savings, in gas savings with tankless water heaters and LED lighting. I mean, it's really all over the home, and I think there's a generational shift as well. I do think the one difference we see in millennial attitudes is that it does, the sustainability frame of mind resonates a little more with the millennials than with the other generations. So we should see this attitude for many years to come, I think.
How about you, Kermit?
Well, I think I'd underscore Richard's point that I think this may be one area where generations really do matter. We talked a lot about how millennials probably are going to look a lot like Gen Xers and baby boomers once they get to that stage in their life. I think in the issue of environmental stewardship, there really may be a fundamental difference here. I think again for us baby boomers, we do energy efficiency upgrades once the dollars and cents pencil out. It's really a financial sort of decision. I think for millennials, it's the right thing to do. We need to really help out and think about a broader picture of activities that we're undertaking. So we've seen these, what we call these sustainable areas that you talked about, water conservation and healthy home and alternative energy and things like that, really mushrooming recently. We've been surveying remodeling contractors, and they tell us that fully 30% of their business has a sustainable motivation behind it, that the homeowner expressed some concern within some sustainable area in undertaking that project. That's a huge number, and it's a number that we think probably is going to grow in the years ahead.
You know, another certainly obvious change that we've seen, and Richard McVale, maybe you could comment on this one, is technology. Technology in terms of how the consumer is approaching products and remodeling. Give us sort of your take of not only the importance, because it just becomes sort of a way of life, but what does that look like moving forward?
Well, I think a lot of people are asking that question, and so I wouldn't want to give too definite an answer. We call it the connected home at Home Depot, and you know, you've seen obviously advances in consumer electronics over the last decade, and then Wi-Fi technology come to the home, and now Wi-Fi and other wireless technologies being able to enable products within the home. You know, I think that there are definitely cases around safety and security where that's resonating, where you have the ability to have a video camera that can capture live video, or you think about other security features. There's sort of the sustainability piece as well. So the ability to control your home's systems more effectively to save you money, that seems to be resonating with customers. And so there are independent uses of some of this connected technology that are definitely gaining traction. What's not clear is how this whole ecosystem of things, the Internet of Things, is going to work together. And there's so much work going on right now, and a lot of conjecture on how that works with different standards. But this is going to be a big year, I think, to see where that area progresses.
How about from Masco's perspective, Richard? What's your sort of crystal ball say is the impact of technology in terms of the consumer selection, experience?
Well, certainly we are examining the home connectivity as well and looking at how that works together, because I agree with you that no one has their crystal ball for what is that going to look like. I think from the Masco perspective, and actually Home Depot, you mentioned it earlier, has been a leader in this. I would suggest that technology for technology's sake isn't where it's going. It's about relevant innovation and bringing things that matter to the consumer. Easier ways to install product, a better feeling shower, making it so that they are more easily able to have a good home experience overall. And you've pushed us to come up with those products that are relevant innovation, not necessarily technology per se, but relevant innovation that the consumer cares about.
So, in terms of the do-it-yourself projects, you know, we have a slide that we'll put up here. I think that's sort of important, that the younger homeowners, you know, devoting a larger percentage of their spending. Richard, maybe you can comment on that particular slide?
So, I would say, as I had commented earlier, I think that the propensity for the younger generation to do DIY projects is really similar to those of older generations at that point in their lives. And so this statistic actually doesn't surprise me at all. What we've learned about the millennial generation is that while I said they spend in similar ways to our other customers, we do see them responding a little bit more sharply to efficiency, to the connected home, to innovation that allows them to do projects more easily. And then there's another trend that's customization. There's a sense of individualism within the millennial generation that certainly I think bodes well for the home improvement industry, letting them express themselves in their homes. So I'm not surprised by this.
So we're getting close to our time. Kermit, you and certainly the team have devoted a tremendous amount of time, you know, in this report. I've seen certainly all of us have spent some time reading it. So I think it really represents, I think, a wonderful sort of pulse of sort of what's happening out there, some clarity about the future. How would you summarize and maybe some of the benefits from our audience of, really diving in and reviewing the report?
I'll see if I can do this, Mark, in 25 words or less. How about that? And I've really enjoyed the discussion this morning. I think a lot of great insights on how this industry, this big, complicated industry, has played out. So the big points, I think, are number one, the home improvement industry as an industry that we define it is a very big industry, $300 billion a year, almost 2% of GDP. Second point is that it survived much better during this cycle than the other sectors of the construction industry. Didn't fall as far during the downturn and has largely recovered from the downturn, unlike any other sector of the construction industry. So having recovered, though, I think it's important to point out that it's really changed pretty dramatically from what it looked like back in 2005 and 2006 and 2007 when the volume of business was of comparable size. I think the day of the really upper end remodel, kitchen remodel, bath remodel is, I won't say behind us, but it's going to be a smaller share of what the market looks like moving forward. And instead, we're going to rely on other segments of this industry that are really just emerging now to drive further growth. So we talked about the high demand for rental housing and fixing up the rental stock, a stock that's very old, 40 years old on average now. Didn't have a lot of spending on it during the downturn. There was so much focus on home buying during the last upturn that the rental stock was largely overlooked during that period too. So we've got strong demand for a segment of our housing stock that really is significantly underinvested. Secondly is making homes more accessible for older Americans. So we've got this huge wave of baby boomers moving into their late 50s and 60s, living in homes that by and large they want to stay in, and living in homes that by and large won't accommodate their needs as they age in those homes. And as I say, not a problem and not a situation in most parts of the country that can be resolved by new construction. Got to be resolved by improvements and retrofits to current homes. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that work unfold. Thirdly is these energy efficiency retrofits we talked about, as well as other sustainable improvements. I think as we talked about, a greater focus on environmental stewardship moving forward, and I think that's a trend that's going to be with us for a while. We didn't mention in the discussion about home automation, but I think not insignificant, the Google acquisition of Nest, for example. Suddenly we've got some big players in this market that aren't traditionally in the building products market, and I think they have the potential to really change that discussion pretty significantly. We'll see how it plays out. And then finally, really after 10 years of waning, we finally see a strong surge in the DIY market coming back as millennials move into home ownership and continue to play the role that we've seen them play in this market. I think they do offer a lot of opportunities there.
Excellent. So again, I just want to thank our panelists, thank our audience for joining us. If you'd like to certainly get more information, you can go to the Joint Center website. Also, as you think about sort of what's happening out there, I think the media is grabbing a hold of, I think, this movement as well. We just pulled, Wall Street Journal says remodeling's getting the mojo back, although that's not necessarily something we measure up at Harvard.
We don't have a mojo scale yet, do we?
That's right. It certainly sounds good. And, I think Bloomberg and others are talking about how remodeling is really driving, I think, sort of the housing industry. And I think that not only what our certainly panelists were talking about and the importance of what it's talking about, but certainly encourage others to have that same enthusiasm and certainly get a hold of the report, and I think you will. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.